Okay. All right, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Oh Hell No podcast. So today I am looking crazy on this camera. I did it all for my guest because he's so full of energy and he's like on camera and I didn't want him to be alone.
That's
So
right.
welcome to the podcast, Noble Gibbons.
Thank you, Keisha. I'm so stoked, girl.
Yeah, so Noble is a West Point grad. He is a former Army Ranger, serial entrepreneur, and he's also a podcaster.
Boom.
So we're going to delve into these different areas and, discover a little bit about your journey. So the first thing I want to ask you is about West Point. I'm a New Yorker, I grew up in Westchester County, New York, so like Portchester, so like down to 87. So I always heard of West Point, and I knew it was like this prestigious school, but I never knew if it was a high school or college or what it was. So can you tell us a little bit about what West Point is it hard to get in? Do you have to take a test? Like, what is West Point? Is it just for people in the military or, like, what is it?
Yeah, so great question. Keisha, thanks for having me on your show. Hey,
No
y'all, if you have
problem.
never met Keisha, she is the bee's knees, y'all. She is the real deal Holyfield.
Oh, you're so sweet. I love it.
so, so West Point, there's typically each year there's 14 to 15,000 people that apply and 1,300 they get accepted. So it's a pretty pretty intense kind of a selection process. You have to get nominated by a congressperson or a senator or even a presidential nomination. You have to, what they look for is someone that's well rounded. So if you have a big giant brain and you have max out your SAT and ACT, but you're not athletic at all, they probably not going to get you on. You could be the best jock on the planet, great athlete, but if you're dumb as a box of rocks, they're probably also not going to, I'm saying, look, bring you on either. They're looking for somebody that's kind of well rounded, and that
Mm.
also another big thing about West Point is they look for leaders. So running the captain of the football team or volleyball team or whatever your background is. They're looking for leadership. And then also community. Have you done anything in your community? Are you involved in your church? What do you do outside of academics and athletics? Do you have any kind of life outside of that as well? And then once you get kind of accepted and go through all those different wickets, you've got to have interviews and there's a physical fitness test that you got to do and all this kind of stuff. And once you kind of get your, that's called a nomination or appointment, then let's see. So we started with, I think, 1,400 in our class, and then we graduated with like 900. So we still had a few hundred of attrition in the class. And then it's a military school, so it's a military college. So you're wearing uniforms all the time. In fact, you could YouTube it, West Point, West Point or whatever. You see all kinds of videos and stuff, and then everyone who graduates from West Point becomes a second lieutenant in the Army in whatever branch that they selected. So whether it's medical field, they become doctors, they fly helicopters, for me, I was in the infantry, so I jumped out of airplanes. And so it kind of depends what branch you go. There's a book, amazing book for entrepreneurs, and not just entrepreneurs, but anybody out there, called Grit. It's a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth, and she's like a big baller, Harvard or Stanford or Yale, something like that, big brain lady. And one of the things that the first chapter of the book Grit is actually on the admissions process of West Point.
Mm.
So which is kind of really interesting. So, and then while I was there, you take, like for me, I had to take 23 credit hours per college semester. And for Keisha, that's not a big deal because she has a big brain. But for the rest of us, that maybe God did not bless in that area, it was no joke for me because we had to get up at 5 a.m. We didn't go to bed until 11:30, 12, midnight, because studying and the homework and all that kind of stuff. And then you have to take intramurals and you have to take military stuff. So your day from the time your eyes pop open until almost midnight, you're going pretty hard.
Wow. So I bet that school is super expensive, huh?
So it's free. Meaning that's right. Time to send your kids, right? Meaning that it's I say it's free. Obviously, the government pays for it. So, but how you pay is you have to do 5 years of active duty time in the Army, and then 3 years of, it's called inactive ready reserve. So you can get out after 5 years, but if the country needs you, they can call you back within 3 years of you getting out of the military. So you have to do 5 years active duty time, is kind of how you pay your education back, is kind of how that works in the Army, in the military.
That's not so bad. I
It's not.
mean, for all that you get, and I don't think it's bad.
So check this out, Keisha. One other thing. So my biggest class size all
Mm-hmm.
4 years was 12 kids.
Wow.
All 4 years, my biggest class. We had one professor with 12 kids all 4 years. It was amazing.
Wow. Yeah. Small classes are always good. Um, oh, sorry. That's my daughter. Like, doesn't she see
What's
me?
up, daughter?
Well, does she see I'm on the damn air? So, what is an army ranger? Whenever I hear ranger, I think of the person in the park, but I don't think that's what you were. So tell
Oh,
us.
Keisha, you are awesome, girl. Oh my goodness, I love it. So a ranger is it's a 68-day school that the Army, it's an Army leadership school. In fact, that's another fun thing to YouTube Ranger School. You will have a really good idea. I call it the Army's elite weight loss program. So I lost 40 to 50 pounds in 68 days because you only eat twice a day, and I had 5 minutes to eat each meal. So you're doing missions. We had the first, it's broken down into 3 phases. Each phase is like 2 weeks. The first phase is in Georgia. The second phase is kind of also in Georgia, but it's in the mountains, the Tennessee Valley Divide. And then the last 2 weeks is in the swamps of Florida. And so you're running different missions with your unit, and they call it Op 4. They have bad guys come at you. It's all training, of course, but bad guys, shoot at you, and they throw, simulated grenades, and they don't feed you. So you go through sleep deprivation and food deprivation to see how you will perform in chaotic environments, and expect you to lead. And they assess you, and they're watching you and rating you, and so it's pretty intense.
Wow, I was about to say that sounds really intense. I would not be ready for that. So, what did you love about military life, and what did you struggle with?
Ooh, great question. So at West Point, and again, it was by God's grace that I got into that school. I tell people, so the people that have heard of West Point before, they're like, "Oh man, snap, you went to West Point?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah." It's like, "Oh, you must be smart." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I graduated the bottom third of my class." Right? And I tell them, I said, "Look, I had a 4.0. If you add up all 4 years," you know what I'm saying? So it's no joke. It's no joke, right? So what I loved was, and what was cool about West Point specifically was everybody was the captain of their team. Everybody was smart. Everybody is a type A person. Everybody's an overachiever. Everybody, right? So like it was amazing to be in an environment where, you know, uh, you are surrounded for 4 years by people that are just unbelievable. It's like being surrounded by a whole group of Keishas. You know what I mean? A whole team of Keisha and her husband, and your husband, 4,000 of you, right? Just being around people like that is you know what it's like just, hanging out with other entrepreneurs, right? It's a great environment. Proverbs, I'm not to trying to preach, but Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man, one woman sharpens another. That's what it's like. And so that's what I loved about the military. And then also just being able to, serve our country. I believe in a lot of the values. Is our country perfect? No, of course not, right? Any organization that has one person in it is going to have issues, and our country is no exception. But I'm very thankful for a lot of the values that our country has promoted and stuff throughout the years. And the thing that I did not like was, you'll appreciate this. So being an entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur for 24 years and almost 25 years. And the military, it's funny, there's a book called Bleeding Talent. The military is great. And West Point, in fact, that book Grit talks about, is great at attracting entrepreneurial leaders, but terrible at keeping them. Because in the military, you have to think a lot of times in a box. You have to color in the lines, and you have to dress a certain way, and you have to act a certain way depending on the unit. There's some units that don't do like that. But for me, as an entrepreneur, as an out of the box thinker, I did not fit that military mold very well. As an entrepreneurial thinker, when someone says you have to do it this way, right, my first response is why? Right? Why do you tell me I have to do it this way? Well, that's because of how we've always done it. And right, that doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. Doesn't mean it's the most efficient way to do it. Right? When you're an entrepreneur, you're constantly looking for the most efficient, the best route. And I can't call you up and say, hey, Keisha, how do I do this? No, I have to look in the mirror and say, hey, we got to figure this out. Or to look at my wife, hey, babe, how do we do this? Right? So anyway, I loved it for the association. I didn't like it for being in a box sometimes.
Nice. I love that. So, what was your first real gig after the military? I want to know if you ever worked in corporate America or you just went straight into entrepreneurship.
Great question. So I went straight into entrepreneurship and absolutely face planted. So I had to get a job because my business acumen at that time was very underdeveloped. But in true entrepreneur fashion, I jumped, and then we built the airplane on the way down. And so in that scenario, our airplane crashed. But again, in true entrepreneur fashion, I always say this, that for entrepreneurs, I call it professor failure, that we learn from failure, right? Failure in my family is not a bad thing. In fact, when my daughter was a little girl, I would tell her, I said, look, and I speak to her in Spanish because I'm half Spanish. I speak to her in Spanish. I'd say, hey, how did you fail today? And if she couldn't tell me how she failed, then I say, okay, let's get out of bed, because I call it cuddle ops. We do, when she was a little girl. And so we do cuddle ops in the bed, and we pray, read the Bible and stuff. And I'd say, okay, if you didn't fail today, let's go and fail at something. Because I wanted to reframe in her mind. That's why we homeschool, because I want to teach her entrepreneurship. I don't want to teach her how to be an employee. And so, not that being an employee is a bad thing. It's just, I want, as an entrepreneur, and I love being an entrepreneur, I want to teach her how to be an entrepreneur. So I did have a stint in the job world in corporate America, and kept trying businesses and stuff. In fact, we started one of our businesses was a network marketing business, and we made 7 figures in network marketing. Replaced my wife's income at 27, my income at 30. So I was financially independent at 30 years old. And then from there, took that experience into, almost 9 or 10 other businesses, 2 medical imaging centers, a fitness center, government contracting business with special operations soldiers, executive coaching, speaking, property management, venture leadership company, all kinds of different businesses. And so once we replaced our income, then we went full time into our own business. So that's kind of been our journey.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So, what has been the most successful business that you started, and what was the worst, and why, for both?
Great question. So let's see. So my Let me say the worst, and this is going to be kind of a weird answer. So the worst business, maybe it was my worst business experience, was actually the network marketing business that we were in, that we made seven figures in revenue. Now we made six figures of profit, but seven figures in terms of revenue. And it was the worst experience because I was emotionally needy, and I had no personal or professional boundaries. I had very little emotional intelligence. I had little to no self-awareness. And so I did not realize until just 4 years ago, once I started growing emotionally, how toxic and emotionally unhealthy that environment was that we were in. So we were successful financially, but we were controlled and manipulated within that organization and that entity, again, because we had no self-awareness and emotional intelligence at the time. In terms of the best experience, I would say our recent endeavor. So a year and a half ago, beginning of COVID, didn't know obviously that COVID was going to come out. I started a podcast a year and a half ago called EQ Gangster. And because I've been emotionally clueless my whole life and been an entrepreneur for so long, being emotionally clueless, I told my wife, I'm like, babe, I can't be the only emotionally clueless guy out there. There's got to be other nobles out there, other emotionally clueless entrepreneurs out there. And as a result of me growing my emotional intelligence and getting healthier emotionally and getting on an emotional fitness program for the past 3 to 4 years, 2 years into my growth, every area of my life was changing. My faith, my marriage, my parenting, my finances, my fitness, my business decisions, my productivity, my capacity, my emotional agility, all these different areas of my life are changing. And so that's when we started the podcast. From the podcast, that has turned into, now I do corporate coaching for emotionally intelligent leadership. And so I've got a couple big corporate clients. I've done speaking engagements now, teaching people emotional health and emotional intelligence.
Wow. So you answered my next question, which was how did you get into emotional intelligence and what made you get a certification as a practitioner? So you realized that you were in a toxic work environment at some point, but was there anything significant that happened that let you know that, hey, something ain't right with me?
Absolutely.
Tell
So
us what it
I'm about to keep it real.
is.
Right.
Yeah,
So
please.
here's some real talk. So the real talk is I yelled at my wife 3 times in 3 weeks, and she said three things. We've been married for 20 years at the time. We're on year 25, but at year 20, I yelled at her 3 times in 3 weeks, and she said three things. Number one, don't ever do that again. Right. Number two, you've never done that before, which means number three, you got more issues than Time Magazine. Right. So she's like, bruh, you need some help, man. So went to counseling, and this counselor introduced me to this revolutionary new concept called feelings and emotions. I was like, did you just cuss at me, bro? Like, what are you talking about, man? Feelings and emotions? Like, what is that? Like, is this Harry Potter, like voodoo magic stuff, sorcery bit? Like, he's like, bro, you need some help. And so, once he started me on this journey of like, man, introduced me. I never, in my house, my mom's a 4'10" little Mexican lady. My dad was a big giant white guy. So I look like my dad, but I can habla, right? And so we grow up not ever discussing our feelings and emotions. And so in my, a lot of Hispanic ladies are real strong, powerful ladies. And so in our house, we would just yell and scream at each other. Right. And I didn't know any different. And we would stomp off into our respective corners of the house, come back an hour later and act like nothing ever happened. So there was zero conflict resolution. There was no acknowledgement of feelings and emotions. There was no apologies. And you do that consistently year after year after year. And then I went to West Point. We're not talking about feelings and emotions. Then I went to became a ranger, ranger school, not talking about feelings and emotions. Infantry, business, we're not talking about feelings and emotions. And so that's how I became an adult, an old dude with absolutely the emotional clue bus drove by and I just waved, right? I never got on. I've been emotionally clueless my whole life. And so once I started to learn about all this stuff from counseling and getting counseled and now learning and taking ownership of my feelings and emotions, now, it's been life-changing. So that's kind of how the real story.
Wow. So you are a corporate EQ consultant and coach. So do business owners and corporate companies actually realize they need this service? Because I've worked in places where you're just like, this can't be life, you know. So how do you acquire your clients? And when you do get in, like, is it ever them that directly call you, or how does that manifest itself for you?
That's a great question. This is totally not how stuff normally happens. So 20 plus years, I am, the old Rick Ross, right? Every day I'm hustling, every as an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur, right? It is the hustle and grind. And so, but God was doing some work in me where, so 2020, let's see, 2020. So last year, so check this out. Last year, we cut 90 grand from our income. 90 grand. God said, hey, 90 grand. I was doing a marketing gig that was 70 grand, cut that deal. Another gig I was making 20 grand from. He said, get rid of that deal. So 90 grand. And it's not like we were zillionaires, right? So it's not like we were making right where 90 grand is lunch money. 90 grand was a massive chunk of change for us. And so, and we were working from home. We were, being entrepreneurs. In December, God tells us to take the month of December off. And we had just cut 90 grand from our income. And
So
I was like,
is this voice coming through COVID, or is this like, because I know God talks to us in different ways, right? So are you getting this through your conversations with God, or are you saying like, well, this happened, and I know God was saying like, that's not
no,
the
no,
case.
like he like to, because something that is something to get good confirmation on
Mm-hmm.
is your spouse getting it too, right? If one spouse is like, oh, we need to sell the house, and the other spouse is like, oh no, we don't. God wants unity. He wants us to be unified. And so when I was getting, like, what would happen is either I would get the word and my wife would kind of feel the same way, or vice versa. And so we were both unified in all this stuff. But what's crazy is that when, so cutting 90 grand, again, for me, I'm the provider for my family. Then I was like, hey, God, I'm only getting one bar on my phone right now. There's no way you just asked me to cut 90 grand from my income. And then 2 or 3 months later, he says, take the month of December off. Listen, Keisha, we have never, you tell me how many entrepreneurs that take a month off ever in their lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've been entrepreneurs for 25 years. We had never taken a month off ever, let alone after cutting 90 grand from my income. So he said, take the month off. And I'm like, oh man, I'm itching. I'm tweaking like, oh snap. God, like you just don't tell an entrepreneur, what I'm saying, to just chill, right? You like that, like, so what that means is, God, is chill means I only make 10 calls a day instead of 20 calls a day, right? He's like, no. He's like, now I want you to keep doing your podcast, but I don't want you to get any new business. And I was like, oh, snap. So then
Damn,
check this
what?
out.
Wait a minute. Why is God not talking to me like that? Because I need to hear.
That's
He needs my
right.
phone number or something. What's
That's
really
right.
happening here?
Maybe you need Verizon or AT&T or something, right? Maybe
Right. Can
you
you
need
do a
another.
conference call for me?
That's right. That's right. And so, but here's the thing you got to understand though, is like we have been grinding for 25 years, right? So we've been hustling forever. And so, and really, this is what the deal was, right? He's like, you say you trust me, Noble, but you trust your work ethic more than you trust me as your provider and your source, right? And so, and again, I'm not trying to preach, but I'm just telling you asked, so I'm just telling you my story. And so a week after, so this is January, like January 7th, the week after, I'm like, okay, God, like we chilled in December. Okay. And it's January 7th. We still have it, like we're 90 grand short here. We still have bills to pay. January 7th, I get a phone call. One of my buddies, who's the CEO of a company, of an international company, a $300 million company, calls me up and said, hey, Noble, he had taken our course. We had an 8-week course teaching emotional intelligence. He took our course back in August. And it was like there was only maybe 8 people in our first course, maybe 10 people in our first course. He was one of them. He went through it and that, didn't hear necessarily hear. He's like, yeah, hey, got a lot out of it, whatever, didn't hear much else. So August, so then September, October, November, December, so January, so 4 months later, he calls up and says, Noble, I want you to put together an emotionally intelligent leader development program for me and my top 8 executives of my $300 million company. And I want you to give us monthly one-on-one coaching and monthly group coaching and 2 offsites a year. And what's cool is, as being a certified emotional intelligent practitioner, I've got access to a scientific psychometric EQ assessment that I give to all my clients to get an emotional intelligent before photo, right? It's kind of like a before photo of your emotional intelligence. And that's kind of the foundation that I use to start coaching people from, based on what their goals are and their objectives and their role in their company. And so that one gig replaced half the income that we lost. That was a $45,000 deal right there by itself, right? And that in 1 week, and I had nothing to do with it. I didn't dial for dollars. It was completely out of the blue. And I was like, oh God, you are amazing, right? 3 months later, a buddy of mine, classmate, just retired from the Army as a full bird colonel. He calls me up and says, hey, Noble, I just got a contract with a $3 billion company, but I just got hired as a COO of a big giant company in New York. Is there any chance you can take this contract for me and help do this leadership coaching and consulting for this company? And I was like, God, you are like, this is amazing, right? I had nothing to do with it. He called me out of the blue, totally. God opened those doors. So now it's like in Judges 6 and 7, or Judges 7 and 8 with Gideon, right? The story of Gideon, where God's like, no, you don't get to take all those guys. I'm going to only give you 300 dudes going up against 180,000 bad guys. And he said, because I don't want you to get greedy and think that you're the one that takes the credit. He's like, no, you trust me. You put your trust in me. And as soon as we did that, God has opened the doors, and it's been a huge blessing ever since.
Wow. I like this story, Noble.
It's the real deal. It's the
No,
real deal,
I
Keisha.
believe it. I interview a lot of people who have stories similar to yours, and it just intrigues me. It's amazing. I mean, God works in
Yeah,
my life now, don't get me wrong, but
right.
I like that. Like, I want to have a call, or, some coffee or something like that. I need that connection, you
That's
know?
right.
So that's why I say that. But that is amazing.
And I could give you 2 or 3 other stories like that because other crazy, insane, only God could make happen type of stories that are just, it's humbling. It's super humbling, to be honest with you. It's just humbling.
Yeah.
And I'm just thankful. I'm thankful, very, very thankful.
So now when you get into these places and you start doing your training, cuz my next question is, why do you think some people struggle in this area? And one thing I notice is, like, I've been trying to, cuz I learned about emotional intelligence a little while ago. I mean, I feel like I have emotional intelligence and I'm very self-aware. But I didn't really know what those things were called until I started doing the podcast and meeting a lot of different people who really, taught me things. So I've been trying to make sure that I pass that on to my daughter, right? Because she's still young and I still have a chance. So the emotional intelligence thing, sometimes I see where she's lacking, and she doesn't get certain things. Like you might be talking and telling her something and she totally cuts you off. It's like, oh, is that a deer or is that like a butterfly? And things like that, and I'm like, Hallie, that was so rude. Like you shouldn't do that. You know what I mean? So it when you coach these people or bring your program to them, and you put questions out there to gauge where they are, do you think anyone would give false results because this is what they know that they should be doing, or do you think they're so like not even in touch with it that they will actually give you their honest response, which shows their lack of emotional intelligence? Is it that way and then you're discovering it as you go through the course with like interaction work, or are they pretty honest and it's like right in your face?
Yeah, great question. So, and I'll even jump back to your other question that you had right before this. Do companies, are they even aware of their emotional intelligence, right? Because a company has a certain level and degree of emotional health and emotional intelligence within the organization, which is a reflection of the emotional health and intelligence of the leaders. And what's been fascinating is, having access to the scientific psychometric assessment. There are many senior leaders, big cheese executives that have aspects of their emotional intelligence that's very low. And so there are certain skills that maybe got them to the top, but those skills, those emotional intelligence skills that got them to the top are not what they need in that new role at the top. And so there are aspects of their emotional intelligence that is actually underdeveloped because they didn't need those particular skill sets necessarily, maybe to get them to the top. And so, I've met a number of them that are lacking pretty significantly in some areas that you and I may be like, dude, really? Like, let me give you a specific example. There are a number of executives at the top of a number of different organizations that are lacking empathy. And there has never been a greater need in my lifetime for empathetic leadership than in the last 18 months. Right. And so if you don't have empathetic leadership in today's world, you are going to have a tough go of your experience as a leader or as an entrepreneur. In fact, I had a guy, one of my clients say, okay, Noble, so my assessment says that I have no empathy. And he's like, I didn't need it to get to the top. Why do I need it right now? I said, well, uh, maybe you didn't because you were a gangster salesman and you sold millions of dollars every year in your company. But now that you're in leadership and you're leading people, dude, empathy, like it is I don't want to say it's a requirement, but it's a requirement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I agree 100%. And I love doing shows about leadership because I feel like leadership is so important because you know you're grooming people and you're helping them to be who they want to be. And if you don't have good leadership, then those people can't get to that place. And if you discourage someone when they're like fiery and ready to like learn and take in things, you can like really hurt them for a long time. You can hurt their the way that they think about their lives, their self-esteem. Like so many different things can be jeopardized if you don't have the right leadership in place when you're dealing with people who are happy, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and just trying to make their way in this world. And you have some
Right.
jackass
That's right.
who has no empathy and is you know so yeah, I love what you're doing, and I think that's fantastic that you have that program and that you're working with corporate America, because I think that that's the place where it really needs to be. Like, um, I was in Costco the other day, and the lady was ringing me up, and she was talking about an incident that took place, at work with someone else. And she felt like the other person was trying to, do something that was making her look bad, or they were being dishonest about something. And she looked like she was telling this to someone who was in management. And he looked at her, and I could almost, predict what he was going to say. And he sure enough said what I thought he was going to say. Well, I know him, and he doesn't seem like he would do that. I don't think he would do that. And that is like the worst response when someone is telling you what they have experienced, right?
Boom, boom. That's gaslighting, right? That's completely that's toxic leadership. That's immature. That's a lack of emotional intelligence. That's lack of empathy. That's, seek first to understand, then be understood. And a way to absolutely upset your customers, your clients, your family, your children, your spouse is to say, no, Keisha, you got it all wrong. Right? You don't get it, Keisha. Right?
Yeah.
Like you want to like, yes, that is
Hmm.
just,
And I've
but
had
here's,
yeah, I've had a personal situation like that too, where I had this boss, and she was just like undermining me and doing all types of crazy things. And she was like really good friends with both our bosses. So she had that advantage. And I took this problem to her boss, and her boss said that same thing to me. I've known her for years, and she doesn't seem like she would ever do anything like that. Oh, so I'm just making this up?
right,
Like, like,
right.
so yeah, it's horrible. So how can adults identify lack in this area? And I know that there are a lot of different areas, right? Because, like you specifically said, that someone took the test and they lacked empathy, right? So you might lack empathy, but maybe be stronger in other areas, right?
Right, right.
So, how can we uh, tune in to where we lack certain skills when it comes to emotional intelligence? And what can we do to develop better emotional intelligence skills, like just some basic things?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, let me define what emotional intelligence is. And sometimes we use the term EQ for emotional quotient interchangeably with EI, emotional intelligence. I use those interchangeably with emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is the ability to acknowledge, identify, process, and manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. So the ability to acknowledge, identify, process, and manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. So it's got a self component, so self-awareness, self-management, and it's got an others component or relational component, others awareness and others management, or relational awareness and relational management. And it's those are kind of the four. That's the general standard, kind of industry standard breakdown of emotional intelligence. My particular assessment that I have access to has five categories of emotional intelligence, and then each of those five categories has three subcategories. And what makes my assessment a little different is that it specifically is for leaders, in that it addresses some standard ones: self-perception, self-expression, and interpersonal composites or categories. But the two additional categories that kind of make it unique within the emotional intelligence space is it also includes stress management and decision making, which are obviously massive for leaders. Okay, so some tips on how to begin, and what I encourage people to do is to begin an emotional fitness program. But here's the thing: just like our physical fitness, you can't go to the gym once and like, oh, sweet, I've lost 20 pounds. No, it's you got to make your fitness a regular part of your life, your spiritual fitness, right? Your physical fitness, right? It's got to be a regular part of your life, not just hey, I did it once. I read a book on physical fitness, so I should be in shape, right? No. So same thing with emotional fitness. Emotional fitness is something that I encourage people to develop as part of your life. So what does that mean and what does that look like? So one of the things that I tell people is going ape, APE, going ape. And I use that analogy, and here's why. Excuse me. We all learn our emotional foundations from our childhoods, good or bad. We all learn our emotional foundations from our childhoods. And in my childhood, like I told you briefly, we yelled and screamed at each other, and there was no, and now it was an amazing parents. I love my parents, so thankful for them. But in terms of our emotional development, that was an area that they were not great at. And so I learned how to stuff and avoid my emotions from the jump. And it's nice when it's cute. It's like a cute, furry, fuzzy little monkey when you start as a child and you stuff and avoid your emotions. But what happens is emotional injury after emotional injury after emotional injury feeds that cute, furry, fuzzy little monkey, so that now if you've been stuffing and avoiding like me for year after year, decade after decade, that cute, furry, fuzzy little monkey is now an 800-pound gorilla on your back. That's why I yelled at my wife. All that stuffing and avoiding of my emotions and not addressing them and acknowledging them and dealing with them and processing them became more than I could handle. It got to where I started to behave in a manner that I could no longer control, which is where a lot of addictions come from. I was a food addict for most of my life. I was a people-pleasing addict for most of my life until, again, a few years ago when I started growing in this journey. So that's why I use the analogy of going ape, APE, acknowledge your feelings. Now, how do you acknowledge your feelings? Go to Google, search emotion wheel in the search bar, print that emotion wheel out. So when you doing that acknowledge piece of your emotions, you use that emotion wheel next to you, put it on the refrigerator. It's great family conversations as well. Boom. Then you go to P, permission to feel. Give yourself permission to feel whatever emotions that you're feeling right now. Allow yourself to feel them, the pleasant emotions and the unpleasant emotions. So acknowledge and then permission to feel. Set your alarm, your watch for 60 seconds. It takes the body 60 to 90 seconds to physically feel an emotion. So when you have the acknowledge of, okay, I'm feeling rejected right now. Okay, so I want to set my alarm for 60 to 90 seconds, and I'm going to feel the feeling of rejection for 60 to 90 seconds. Then E, once I do the AP, acknowledge, then permission to feel, now I'm going to express. How do you express it? In writing, in journal. There's a lot of research in the healing power, the catharsis power of writing your emotions and feelings down. So APE, acknowledge, permission to feel, and express is a great part of an emotional fitness program. One other thing, there's an app that you can download in your Android, your smartphone, your Apple phone, your iPhone. It's called Mood Meter. Mood Meter. It's 99 cents on the App Store. It's not mine, so I don't know who made it, but I use that with myself and all my clients. And it's a great way to begin growing your self-awareness and your self-management. So those would be some things I would recommend and encourage people to do. And then episode 120 of my podcast on EQ Gangster, episode 120, I give, it's kind of that kind of ape analogy, that APE analogy, the 3 exercises to help increase your emotional bandwidth, your emotional capacity, and your emotional agility. Episode 120. So those are some things I'd recommend and encourage people to do.
Nice. So, this is the Oh Hell No podcast. So, you have to share an Oh Hell No moment that has taught you something or changed your perspective on something. And of course, an Oh Hell No moment is a moment of shock or disbelief. It could be positive or negative. But in that moment, you were like, oh, hell no.
I love it. I love it. So,
Right?
so, so my oh hell no moment was when I came to the realization that I had zero emotional intelligence, and when I realized I was emotionally clueless, and I had no control over my emotions. I didn't even I wasn't even aware of my emotions, and I was like, oh hell no, I'm not. You know, I am not going to, because I love people. God has given me a passion for people, and I am not going to let this part of my life go unchecked. And I'm going to take ownership and responsibility for my complete lack of emotional intelligence and lack of emotional health and emotional awareness. And I am going to master this area, because we all, it's like blood type. You can't walk around and say, well, I don't have blood. It doesn't apply to me. We all have emotions. Every human being on the planet has emotions, but how many of us are trained to deal with our emotions? Slim to none of us.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we all have these things that impact us every single day. Look at the media, look at society, look at the world today. The world is going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs because the emotional intelligence of our nation is very low. And so I want to help encourage people to grow their emotional health and grow their emotional intelligence with tools and exercises, and have and develop an emotional fitness program, so we can be emotionally available for each other, and not be attacking each other and hating on each other. And there's enough of that. We need some more love and some more empathy and some more encouragement. And here's the thing with emotional intelligence: it doesn't mean that we're walking around singing kumbaya and rainbows and skittle farts and stuff. It's being able to, again, recognize our emotions and control our emotions, not let our emotions control us, and to inform, for our emotions to inform us, so we can make more productive and intelligent decisions, rather than trying to stuff and avoid like I did for most of my life.
Yes, love it. That is so true, people. We need to get it together. I was watching on Instagram today, this guy, I guess he didn't have his mask on. He's trying to get on the plane, and he was yelling at the stewardess, and it was just crazy. And I was like, damn, over a mask? Like, just put your damn mask on to get on the plane and follow the friggin' rules and sit down and shut the hell up so we can get to our destination. That's my rant for today.
Well, I love it, because check this out. One of the things on episode 59, a guy I was interviewing, he said this. He said, Noble, if you don't deal with your emotional issues, your family will.
Yeah,
And I was
absolutely.
like, oh snap. Right. And so unaddressed, like the scenario you just shared there, unaddressed emotional issues do not get better over time. They actually compound.
Yup. And
So
then you're acting like an ass in public. You're doing all kinds of crazy stuff, right? You getting slapped up by your wife because you popped off with her. Like,
That's right. That's right.
just can't, I love
That's
this.
right.
Your work is fabulous, Noble. I love it. Please tell everyone where we can connect with you, where we can check out your podcast. Give us the tea.
All right. Thank you, girl. So the deets are this. So it's eqgangster.com is the website. The podcast and YouTube channel is EQ Gangster. Now, we do have a community, a safe, supportive, encouraging community of people all on this emotional fitness program. You can find that and join that at eqgangster.com/mafia. The EQ Mafia. What? That's the membership group.
I love it. Your energy is so contagious. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate having you, even though you made me get on camera looking crazy as hell. But it's all good. It's real. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right.
And when I
That's
clean
right.
up, people be like, damn, girl, that's you.
You look great, Keisha. You look great, girl.
Thank you.
Thank you
You're so
so much
nice.
for letting me be a part of this, girl. I hope we keep in touch too.
Yes, I'm definitely keeping in touch with you. You should have me on your podcast. I don't know what we would talk about, but we would talk about
There we go.
something.
I love it. I love it.
Yes, for sure.